Those of us who can no longer imagine our lives without access to a computer also have to contend with the question of how this technology is changing us. All technologies, starting with fire, the bow and arrow, and the wheel, have also changed us. But digital communication extends our reach. It allows us to be in places we've never visited, establish important connections with people we've never met. According to our next guest, these new technologies can turn us into, in Latin, Homo Globalis. And is that a good thing? Well, let's find out from Carlo Strenger. He is chair of the clinical graduate program at the Department of Psychology at Tel Aviv University, also the author of Fear of Insignificance, Searching for Meaning in the 21st Century, and we're happy to have you here at TVO. Welcome.
Hello.
Okay, the qualities that Homo Globalis has, you describe them in the book. Share them with us here, if you would.
Well, first and foremost, it has pretty much turned all of us into people who have the globe at our fingertips. We just need an internet connection, and whether we like it or not, we're flooded by icons, stories, videos, pictures, images from all over the place. This, in many respects, has very positive results because, at least in some cases, or in many cases, it turns us into more open-minded people. We're becoming aware of the fact that there are many, many ways of living, that there are cultures that are very different from ours, and that those people who look very strange if we don't know much about them are actually quite similar to us when it comes to human nature.
On the other hand,
it turns out that human nature doesn't really evolve at the pace of technology at all. And what psychological research has shown very clearly is how deep the need of all of us is to have a relatively well-defined group, tradition, culture that we belong to, and where we feel that we're making a difference.
So as it opens up the world to us, it also encourages the wrong word, but provokes us to feel somewhat insignificant in the world.
It actually makes it very difficult for many of us to feel significant. In the past, if you were the baker or the lawyer or the doctor of your quarter, of your city, of your town, you felt that you were of significance. And now many, many of us are actually in professions where we keep being connected to the globe as a whole. So suddenly the field of comparison and the relevant frame of reference has pretty much exploded and is now so huge that the question, am I really of significance? Is any of what I do of any significance at all? Has become a question that's much more difficult to answer.
Do you think that is a rational reaction to the phenomena that we're now dealing with?
I wouldn't say it's a rational reaction. I would say it's an unavoidable reaction. And it has had some impact that is not quite easy to deal with. First of all, when we suddenly can no longer take our own frame of reference for granted, one of the things we do is that we desperately look for something objective to measure whether what we do and who we are is of significance. And it's amazing how the wider culture reflects that. In the last 15 years or so, there is a worldwide explosion of ranking and rating scales. In the past, you used to have Forbes' richest people, Fortune's largest companies. Now you have everything. Forbes doesn't just have the richest, the most influential, the most beautiful, the most sexy, the best known, etc. Now each country has these scales, and most larger cities have rating scales of that sort. And I can tell you, I know a few publishers of magazines who have these scales. They tell me that in the month before they publish it, the world goes berserk. The PR agents flood them. You can't drop my client from number 2 to number 4. He's making more money. He's more influential.
You're serious? This happens?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So we're desperate to be on these lists, and when we don't show up on these lists, it exacerbates the phenomena you're talking about.
And now what's so interesting, you'll tell me, okay, but that's a very, very small elite. I mean, who is on the Time 100s list? Who is on? But what actually happened meanwhile is that every kid has a Facebook account. And so it may not be how many 100,000 Google entries are there on me, but how many likes did I get for my last selfie? And what I'm actually trying to do is not to make fun of this phenomenon, but to explain what in the general culture and in the constellation within which we live has kind of pushed us towards this deification of the quantifiable self. It's actually quite interesting. I see this in my clinical practice. In a very paradoxical way, people who are in relatively prestigious professions and who have actually achieved quite a bit, in a sense, suffer more from it because they feel that they're competing against, the biggest, the largest, and the greatest. In academia, we're not supposed to be preoccupied by things like that at all. It has taken over completely because your value now depends on how influential your journal is and how often you're quoted. So basically, the value of an academic is a number.
So what is the psychological impact of this phenomenon that you're describing?
One impact is a persistent sense that I haven't done enough. Because what has happened along with this, the explosion in information technology, is also that we are living in a myth, a cultural myth, which is that if you just really try hard enough, anything is possible. And the immortal slogan that Nike invented in 1988, "Just do it," has kind of become the icon of our time. I'm not trying to say that Nike in any way is responsible for that. It just hit the zeitgeist in a way that...
It's a reflection of something that was out there already.
That was there already. And you see people who keep feeling, I could have done more, others have done more. And then don't forget that today we're all flooded through the global infotainment system with global success stories that are truly staggering. I'm not even talking about the ones that are slightly on the verge of ridiculous, let's say, Gangnam Style getting 1.5 billion YouTube views. I'm talking about the fact that Sergey Brin and Larry Page, by the age of 30, literally had transformed the world. Mm-hmm. Mark Zuckerberg, by the age of 27, literally had transformed the world.
So what have you done today? Right? That's the...
Yeah, so you say, okay, so I've published 7 books and I've written X article. This is absolutely nothing. That's ridiculous.
Let me go out on a bit of a tangent with this then. If you also, as you become Homo Globalis, so you have a wider opening to the understanding of the world and the possibilities of the world and the good things and you realize relative to all of that you may be fairly insignificant. Is another impact that you're less rooted in the community in which you live, less civic-minded, you care less about what happens in your own hometown?
Okay, that's a really, really complex issue. Because you see, what happens is that I don't think that it necessarily makes you less civic-minded, but your relevant community may not necessarily be the community that you physically live with. Let's say you're an astrophysicist, okay? The people who are really your community are a worldwide network of not too many people who speak your language. Let's say very often I feel that I'm actually much closer to a network of people who share my values, my core values, which are very universalistic, which very much are concerned with human rights, than I necessarily feel connected to my neighbor who may have very different values from my own. So I don't think that it necessarily means that you're less civic-minded, but it certainly can mean that many people feel that their communities are no longer localized, but spread all over the globe.
In which case, your ability to have an impact on that, you would infer, would be less.
That again depends. You see, take all the the network of international NGOs. ranging from Amnesty International to Greenpeace, etc. These are global networks that are actually making a huge difference. But quite often, these very globalized individuals, I call them world citizens, those who feel actually responsible for the globe at large, maybe a little bit more even than to their particular communities that they're geographically associated with, they're often in conflict with their local communities. The local communities feel that they're detached, that they're elitists, that they don't really belong here. And you see that nowadays in almost every developed economy. In Israel, where I live, it is a very powerful phenomenon. You know, universalist-oriented liberals are seen as, you know, people who don't really care for the immediate, for what's going on next door. You can see it I was born and grew up in Switzerland. Switzerland has just voted to curtail immigration. Now, never mind that actually most of the immigrants into Switzerland in the last 10 years were highly qualified engineers, doctors, etc., that Switzerland actually needs. But there is a strong tension between those globalized individuals, those world citizens that are defined by their wider allegiances, and communities that feel much more rooted by their local customs, religion, tradition, etc.
So if you're going to look at politics, for example, somebody who had more worldly experience, more letters after their name because they got more education, that kind of thing, that becomes something to be suspicious of as opposed to prized. Is that fair to say?
Well, we saw this writ large, enormously large, when Obama was elected. I mean, the whole birther movement basically said Obama is not American, because much of it, of course, was covert racism, but much of it also was that Obama's frame of references, horizon, was really very much determined by the fact that he was not only born in Hawaii, but grew up part of his childhood in Indonesia. So he is really, in a sense, he's very American, but in a sense, he's probably the first truly globally oriented president of the United States of America.
He's the first Homo Globalis president, isn't he?
He is probably the first Homo Globalis president, yes. And that, as you know, many Americans felt very uncomfortable with that.
Would that contribute, do you think? I mean, we've seen this all over the place, certainly in this province, in this country. I don't know about in Israel, but maybe you could tell me. Certainly in the United Kingdom, certainly in the United States, the numbers of people who vote is significantly less over the years. There's a constant trend going down. Does this contribute to that?
It could, but that's partially just due to, and that's not only due to the explosion of information technology. It's also due to the fact that many citizens feel that they're simply out of their depth with many of the questions that they're faced with, because the complexity of the issues has become so high that they keep deferring to, we don't understand much about this anyway, or these guys over there, be it in Washington, D.C., in Paris, or in Berlin, don't care about, Brussels, I mean, that's most, the EU, there it's really a very interesting phenomenon. They don't care about us anyway, and I think we're facing a real question how we can redemocratize or revitalize democratic institutions in a global age.
Well, you've raised the EU. There's also, of course, the United Nations as well. These are two institutions overwhelmingly made up of people who not only are Homo Globalis, but believe in what that represents. And I guess you could make the argument that over the past, well, pick your number, decade, several decades, whatever, hasn't exactly been a ringing endorsement for Homo Globalis. Would you agree?
Unfortunately, yes. And I think that the main reason is that our educational systems are badly lagging behind the actual reality. You see, this is the first age where any child who is educated in a country that has internet access could be educated in a way that that really develops a global horizon. It's no longer science fiction. You see 1.5-year-olds who play with iPads. So it's in a way we have the possibility to do that, but our human institutions change slowly. And so what happens is that often the opposite happens. What we haven't spoken about is a backlash to all this globalization, which is that many communities are trying to shut themselves off from this overwhelming power of the global infotainment system. And we see that primarily in the various fundamentalist movements that have occurred in pretty much all major religions that say, we don't want our children even to know about the world out there. We want them just to hear the stories, the myths, the narratives, and the truths, beliefs that we want to implant in them, and we want them to be completely disconnected from the rest. And that's another big source of tension between the global community and traditional local communities.
A couple of minutes left. Let me put one last thing here on the table, and that is you refer in your book to a psychology of world citizenship. What do you mean by that?
Well, I've mentioned organizations like Amnesty International, Greenpeace, before. There is, I think, today really a network of human beings who are very deeply committed to the idea that we need to take into account how enormously we're interconnected with each other, that today most problems can no longer be, most major problems that humanity is facing can no longer be solved taking into account national borders. Anything from global warming through pollution, you cannot fight if your neighbor, and often not just your neighbor, but the people on the other side of the physically at the other side of the globe, if they don't cooperate, it's not going to happen. And I think that in this respect, developing a horizon of world citizenship is no longer a luxury for elites, is something that we absolutely need to develop in all of the next generation if we're to survive as a species.
Understood. Carlo Strenger, Chair of the Clinical Graduate Program of the Department of Psychology at Tel Aviv University. Toda rabah. Thanks for coming.
It was a great pleasure.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.